The aroma of roasted bell pepper and shrimp sauce filled the kitchen while my grandmother Martha stirred the golden roux in the cast-iron pot. At 20, I was the only one in the family who cared about learning her perfectly imperfect Creole techniques. "Jack, the secret is all about timing. Not everything valuable can be rushed," she said, adjusting her glasses on the tip of her nose as she watched me chop the onions exactly the way she had taught me. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Upstairs, my sister Sarah was recording another video for her 200,000 followers. At 18, she already had sponsorships from cosmetic and clothing brands that paid her bills. My parents loved it. They called it a sensible venture, as my dad liked to say. "Jonathan, when are you going to give up this cooking nonsense and do something useful with your life?" my father would ask during dinner while savoring the jambalaya I had prepared. The irony never got to him. My mother would only sigh. "Your father just wants the best for you, dear." Translation. She agreed with him, but tried to soften the blow. We lived in a 2-story house in New Orleans' Garden District. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. My room? It was the old guest room at the end of the hall, while Sarah had the main room with her own bathroom. Small signs that sent a clear message. It was a rainy Tuesday when I got the phone call. Grandma Martha had suffered a sudden heart attack. There wasn't any time to say goodbye. Only memories of laughter in the kitchen and promises of more recipes to learn. At the lawyer's office 2 weeks later, reality hit hard. For my granddaughter Sarah, I leave my savings of $150,000 to cover her university studies at the school of her choice. My dad clapped his hands excitedly. Sarah smiled, pretending modesty while already planning her move to New York. For my grandson Jonathan, I leave the Thompson family cookbook, along with the box of culinary mementos from my father. The lawyer handed me a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "That's it?" my father whispered to the lawyer, who just shrugged. In the car, my mother tried to explain. "Jack, your grandmother knew how much you loved cooking. It's a sentimental gift, and money for college is much more practical," Sarah added while checking her notifications on her phone. The following week was the spark that ignited everything. My parents announced that they had bought a Tesla for Sarah to help her in her influencer career. When I asked about any financial help for culinary school, I heard, "You're old enough to support yourself now, Jonathan. We can't keep paying for hobbies." That night, I packed my bags. I took my clothes, some kitchen utensils I had bought with my own money, and Grandma Martha's package that I hadn't opened yet. Before leaving, I grabbed some old pans from the storage that my mother had replaced, and the set of knives that my dad considered outdated. My apartment in the Treme neighborhood was tiny. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that was too small, and the constant noise from the jazz bars. I managed to get a job as a dishwasher at Tujag's restaurant. 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, leaving with wrinkled hands and a sore back. On the weekends, I did deliveries to make extra money. It was only after 3 exhausting weeks that I finally opened Grandma's package. Inside was a leather-bound cookbook with the name Thompson engraved in golden letters that time had faded. My great-grandfather, a Hungarian immigrant who had adapted to New Orleans cooking by blending European techniques with local ingredients, had put it together. The yellowed pages held handwritten recipes, some in Hungarian, others in English, with notes in the margins written in various handwritings over the decades. A culinary family tree. On the last page, I found a taped envelope. I pulled it out carefully so as not to damage the paper. Inside was a scrap of colored paper that looked like a postage stamp. It was protected by a clear cover with a note written by my grandmother. It belonged to my father. He said one day it might be worth something. I didn't think much about it. I put the stamp back in the envelope and started studying the recipes. Maybe I couldn't go to culinary school, but I literally had my family's knowledge in my hands. The manager at the restaurant where I worked had promoted me to kitchen assistant. It wasn't glamorous, but at least I was close to the ovens. That's where I met Rebecca, the waitress with curly hair and an easy smile who always asked to taste my culinary experiments when the chef wasn't looking. "You should do something with those recipes your grandma gave you," Rebecca commented one day as she savored a piece of bread I had baked using one of my great-grandfather's techniques. "This is better than anything we serve here." One night after closing, I showed her the cookbook and, out of curiosity, the stamp I had found. "My uncle collects stamps," she said, examining the small piece of paper. "This looks really old. Have you shown it to anyone?" I shook my head. Honestly, I hadn't really given it much thought. It was just a curious keepsake from my great-grandfather. The next day, Rebecca dragged me to a collectibles shop in the French Quarter. The owner, a man named Martin, put on his reading glasses and examined the stamp carefully. "Oh my," he murmured, looking over the glasses. "Do you have any idea what this is?" When I said no, he took a deep breath. "This is a Treskilling Yellow, one of the rarest stamps in the world. It was issued in Sweden in 1855, and because of a printing error, it came out yellow instead of green. There are only a few known copies." I thought it was a joke. "If it's authentic, and it looks like it is," he continued, "it's worth millions." 3 weeks of expert validation confirmed it. The stamp was genuine. Sotheby's auction house took the case. Reporters started calling. The story of the young dishwasher who found a fortune in a cookbook became a local headline. My phone rang. It was my mother. "Jack, we saw you on the news. Why didn't you tell us about the stamp?" I kept the conversation short. I said I was still processing everything and would talk to them later. I didn't mention that the auction was scheduled for the following week. Auction day changed my life forever. Sitting next to Rebecca and a Sotheby's representative, I watched as collectors from around the world bid on the Treskilling Yellow. When the auctioneer's gavel struck the final bid of $3.2 million, I felt my whole body tremble. 3 days later, my lawyer, yes, I had a lawyer now, finalized all the documents. After taxes and auction fees, I ended up with just over $2.3 million in my bank account. "What are you going to do now?" Rebecca asked as we drank coffee at the French market. I looked at my great-grandfather's cookbook, which I carried with me every day. "I think I know exactly what to do." We found a historic building on Magazine Street that had once been a restaurant in the 1950s, but had been abandoned for over a decade. The owner could hardly believe it when I offered cash. In 6 months, we completely transformed the place, preserving the original hardwood floors and exposed brick while installing a modern, functional kitchen. I called the restaurant Thompson's Legacy, as a tribute to my Hungarian great-grandfather and to Grandma Martha, who kept his recipes alive. The concept was simple: New Orleans Creole food with a touch of Eastern European influence, following recipes that had been passed down through generations. The first few weeks were chaotic. I had never managed a business before, and even with Rebecca as the manager, we made many mistakes. We hired an experienced chef to guide me and a team of cooks willing to learn the peculiar techniques documented by my great-grandfather. "This sauce calls for Hungarian paprika, not Cajun," I explained to the sous chef, showing him the marginal note in the book. "It's what gives it that unique depth." Slowly, we found our rhythm. After 3 months, the Times-Picayune food critic gave us 4 stars, describing the food as a transcendent experience that blends the best local traditions with unexpectedly harmonious flavors from the old world. Reservations skyrocketed. We needed to expand the team. Rebecca, who had become a partner in the business, suggested we hire an additional manager so I could focus on cooking and developing new recipes based on the book. 1 year after opening, Thompson's Legacy was named one of the 10 best new restaurants in the country by Food and Wine magazine. My photo appeared in the article next to a plate of Gulf shrimp goulash, the perfect fusion of my heritages. "We need to expand," Rebecca said one night after we closed the restaurant. Our relationship had evolved beyond professional partnership, and we now shared an apartment in the Garden District, ironically, just a few blocks away from my parents' house, which I still hadn't visited. The next day, we signed a contract to buy the building next door and expand the restaurant. We also made a deal with a publisher to release a cookbook that told our family's story. It was during that same week that the inevitable happened. Our maitre d' called me during the evening service. "Chef, there are some people at table 7 who insist on talking to you. They said they are relatives." My heart raced as I walked across the main dining room. There they were, my dad, my mom, and Sarah, all elegantly dressed with expressions that mixed pride and embarrassment. "This place is amazing, son," my mother said as she got up to hug me. Her familiar perfume brought a wave of conflicting emotions. My dad extended his hand formally. "I never imagined that, well, you really transformed those old recipes into something special." Sarah was silent, studying the menu. "This dish," she pointed at the chicken paprikash with andouille, "is the one Grandma Martha used to make on Sundays?" I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "It was my favorite," she admitted, sounding genuinely nostalgic. "May I suggest the tasting menu?" I offered, trying to maintain my professional composure. "It has a bit of everything, including the chicken you mentioned." I personally served each dish to my family, explaining the origins of each recipe. My mother cried when she tasted the potato bread that Grandma used to make in the winter. My dad was silent, but I noticed how he closed his eyes when he tried the goulash, the same dish he had once dismissed as rustic food without refinement. After dessert, apple strudel with bourbon, my dad asked to speak with me in private. I took him to my office at the back of the restaurant. "We need to talk about the stamp," he said bluntly. "It was part of the family inheritance. Your mother and I believe we should have been consulted before the sale." It felt like a punch in the stomach. After everything, he still saw only the monetary value. "The stamp was in the cookbook that Grandma left me," I replied calmly. "The very same book you considered a trivial inheritance compared to the money Sarah got for college." "We didn't know about the stamp," he protested. "Exactly. Just like you didn't know the value of what was in this book," I said, pointing at the original cookbook, now kept in an acrylic case in my office. "It wasn't just recipes, Dad. It was history. It was culture. It was love." My dad looked down, then up at the walls of the office, decorated with old photos of Grandma Martha and Great-Grandpa Thompson. "We consulted a lawyer," he continued, but with less conviction. "Technically, we could contest the sale." I took a deep breath. "You could try, but you would be suing your own son over something that legally belonged to me. And all for what? Money?" The heavy silence that followed was palpable. Through the office window, we could see the main dining area where my mom and Sarah were talking with Rebecca. "Is your restaurant packed every night?" my dad asked, suddenly changing the subject. "We have a 6-week waiting list for Fridays and Saturdays." He nodded slowly. "You really found your way." When we returned to the table, the atmosphere had shifted. My mom asked to see the kitchen. Sarah wondered if I needed help with social media marketing. "I have different followers than your regular customers," she explained. "I could attract a younger crowd." At the end of the evening, as they were leaving, my dad stopped at the door. "That saxophonist who plays here, he's really good. Come play on Fridays and Saturdays," I replied. "I used to listen to jazz a lot when I was a kid." He smiled faintly. "It's been a long time since I played my saxophone." "We're always looking for musicians for Sunday nights," I said before overthinking it. He nodded almost imperceptibly. "Maybe I'll show up one day." As I watched them leave, Rebecca came over and held my hand. "Are you okay?" "Better than I expected," I replied. And it was true. 3 months passed since my family's unexpected visit. A quiet routine had settled in. My dad would occasionally show up on Sundays with his saxophone to play some tunes with the house band. We never spoke about the legal process he mentioned. In the 3rd week, my mom started joining him, always sitting at the same table near the small stage. She was the one who made the first real move toward reconnecting. "I've been thinking a lot about the stories your grandmother used to tell," she said one Sunday afternoon, as I briefly sat at her table between services. "About how your great-grandpa Thompson arrived in New Orleans without speaking English, with nothing but his recipes and culinary techniques." I nodded, surprised by her sudden interest. "Do you have any photos of him? Documents? Anything besides the recipes?" I showed her the small collection I kept in my office, some yellowed photographs, a naturalization certificate, and the original Hungarian passport. "People would love to know this story," she commented, her eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Customers already ask about the origins of the recipes. It's more than just food, Jack. It's family history." 2 weeks later, my mom presented her formal proposal. She wanted to be the historian of the restaurant, creating a small museum in the additional space we had acquired, telling the saga of the Thompson-Sullivan-Wilson family through food. "I have free time now that I retired from teaching," she explained, "and I realized I never gave proper value to the history on my side of the family." The project gave her a renewed purpose. She spent weeks interviewing distant relatives, researching public records, and even hired a genealogist to trace the exact route my great-grandfather took from Hungary to Louisiana. Rebecca loved the idea. "It adds another dimension to the restaurant. We're not just serving food, we're sharing a cultural heritage." Sarah also got involved, though in an unexpected way. On her 3rd visit to the restaurant, she spent more time observing the decor than eating. "This place has an amazing aesthetic potential that you're not taking advantage of," she declared. "Mom's stories, the food, everything needs a more cohesive backdrop." The following week, she showed up with color schemes, lighting proposals, and ideas to redesign the space in a way that kept its historic authenticity while highlighting elements that told our family story. "I always thought your digital marketing course was just about growing your followers," I commented, impressed with her detailed proposals. "I dropped the course," she confessed. "I was in my 2nd semester of interior design when you left home. I didn't tell our parents because they were already upset about your departure. That revelation changed the way I saw my sister." Maybe we had more in common than I had imagined, both searching for expressive outlets that our parents never fully understood. 6 months after the first visit, Thompson's legacy was transformed. The extra space now housed The Journey of Flavor, a permanent exhibition my mom envisioned, telling our family's story through food, with interactive stations where visitors could learn basic techniques and discover the ingredients that defined our path. Sarah redesigned the main dining room, incorporating elements that recalled both Hungary and Louisiana, creating a visual dialogue between the two cultures found in our dishes. Even my dad contributed, not only by playing on Sundays, but also by helping to set up a music schedule that celebrated the rhythms influencing the local cuisine. It was during the reopening party that I realized just how much had changed. My entire family was there, not as guests but as collaborators, each having found their place in this new chapter. "You created something bigger than a restaurant," Rebecca said, now officially my fiancée, as we looked over the packed dining room. "You brought your family back together." The night was an absolute success when my dad asked for everyone's attention. My heart raced as I wondered what he was about to say. "Some of you know me as the Sunday saxophonist, but I'm mainly known as Jack's father, the man who turned old recipes into something extraordinary," he began, sounding strangely nervous. "What many don't know is that years ago I discouraged my son from following his passion. I thought cooking was just a hobby, not a career. I wanted him to take a more secure path." He made air quotes with his fingers. "It's ironic, considering now he employs 22 people and just signed a contract for a cooking show on PBS." Murmurs of surprise and applause spread through the room. The show's announcement wasn't public yet. As a family, we made mistakes. We valued the wrong things. We failed to recognize the treasures that were right in front of us. He raised his glass. "So, this toast is not just to the success of Thompson's legacy, but to all those who have the courage to follow their own path, even when those who are supposed to support you fail to see its value." The tears streaming down my face weren't from resentment, but from relief. In that moment, something was healing. After the party, when only family remained, my dad pulled me aside for a private conversation. "We dropped the lawsuit," he said simply. "Actually, we never even filed it. It was just wounded pride, I suppose." "Thank you," I replied. "There's one more thing." He pulled an envelope from the inner pocket of his jacket. "The lawyer who handled your grandmother's will found this among her documents. It was meant to be given to you on your 25th birthday, but with all the chaos after you left, it ended up with us." The envelope was sealed and had my name written in Grandma Martha's elegant handwriting. Inside was a small key and a note. "The recipe box has a false bottom. This key opens it. With love, Grandma." My heart raced. I ran to my office where the carved wooden box that accompanied the cookbook was stored. I had examined that box dozens of times, taking out old recipe cards, photographs, and small mementos, but I never noticed it had a secret compartment. With my family watching, I inserted the key into an almost imperceptible slot at the base of the box. The bottom opened, revealing a hidden space. Inside was a small velvet pouch and a yellowed envelope. The pouch contained a gold coin. Rebecca, who had researched the stamp, immediately recognized it. "It's a 1908 Hungarian korona," she said, impressed. "From the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Extremely rare, especially in this condition." "How much is it worth?" asked Sarah. Rebecca examined the coin carefully. "It's hard to say for sure, but probably between $20,000 and $30,000 for a collector." "Another hidden treasure," murmured my mom. I carefully opened the envelope. The letter inside, written in Hungarian and English, was dated 1952. "Dear Thompson, these are my last possessions from the old country. The Swedish stamp I bought in Vienna before the war, and the gold coin my father gave me when I left Hungary forever. The war and the revolution took everything we had except our skills and these small relics. I keep them not for their value, which may one day be substantial, but as reminders of where we came from. The recipes I carry in my memory will be worth more than gold to our family through generations. Keep them alive and teach them to your children. If you ever need to, sell these relics. Otherwise, pass them on along with the stories they carry. With love, your father, Miklos Thompson." When I finished reading, silence filled the room. My dad was the first to speak. "Your great-grandfather was right. The recipes turned out to be worth more than the gold coin and the stamp combined." He gazed at the cookbook I had built my life around. 6 months later, Rebecca and I were expecting our first child. We decided that if it was a boy, he would be named Thompson, and if a girl, Martha. The television show Culinary Legacy premiered to a surprisingly high audience. In every episode, I not only taught one of my great-grandfather's recipes, but told the story behind it, often with my mom as a special guest to add historical context. Sarah finally found her true calling as well. Her work at the restaurant led to contracts to redesign other historic establishments in the city, preserving their essence while subtly modernizing them. My dad completely abandoned his business consulting and now managed the jazz nights at the restaurant, rediscovering his passion for music that he had set aside years ago for a real job. As for the Hungarian gold coin, we decided not to sell it. Instead, it took pride of place in the Journey of Flavor exhibit, alongside my great-grandfather's letter translated so that all visitors could read it. On a quiet night after the restaurant had closed, I found myself alone in the kitchen, preparing a special batch of potato bread for the team's breakfast, using my great-grandfather's original recipe. While kneading the dough using the techniques Grandma had taught me, I reflected on how a simple cookbook had transformed not only my life, but that of my entire family. What seemed like an insignificant inheritance compared to the money Sarah got turned out to be infinitely more valuable. The rare stamp gave me the resources to start the business, yes. But it was the recipes, the stories, and the techniques passed down through generations that created something truly lasting. Grandma's words echoed in my mind. The secret is all about timing. Not everything valuable can be rushed. She was talking about much more than just cooking. As the familiar aroma of bread baking filled the kitchen, I felt a deep connection with everyone who had come before me. My Hungarian great-grandfather, who arrived in a foreign land with only his culinary skills. My grandmother, who preserved these traditions even when they seemed outdated. And now me, turning that legacy into something new without losing its essence. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. The greatest treasure wasn't in the valuable stamp or the gold coin. It was in the stories we tell, the flavors we share, and the wisdom to recognize that things which seem worthless often hold the richest rewards. That was the true fortune my grandmother left me, a legacy that no amount of money could ever buy.